All right, so we're live, Kevin.
Great.
Hello, everybody. So this is Creating Consciousness. This is episode 12, and I am here with Dr. Kevin Mollet, who is like the head of Total Body Modification, right?
Sure. That's close enough.
I'm going to adjust this real quickly so that way we have a better view of you. And I'm going to expand this out so we don't have distractions. Okay. So, for those of you who didn't see my video with Kira working on my body prophylactically with the jab, you got to check it out. I'll put the link in this post below. But anyway, Kevin, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Amazing.
Good.
Yeah.
Kevin's typically doing well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first and how you got involved in TBM?
Sure. So I developed a dysautonomic syndrome very early in life. Today it would be most commonly related to, say, fibromyalgia syndrome. And so I had mood and energy disorders, I had a lot of immune issues, I was heavy, and no energy, wasn't sleeping well, et cetera, et cetera. And by the time I was 12, it was kind of pulling my whole world down. And I was about to be kicked out of school. And I had a stroke of luck, if you will, if you think luck exists. I don't. I found this book in our school library, responding to an assignment from my science teacher, called Sweet and Dangerous by John Yudkin. Dr. Yudkin in the 1950s developed the foundational concepts for metabolic syndrome, which is basically type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease, depression, insomnia, all wrapped into one constellation. And he was rejected by the scientific elites of the time in the UK. And so he went to the lay public and started publishing material straight to the lay audience. I read that and cut out sugar entirely at age 12 and noticed a huge surge in my health. Noticed I could concentrate in school and I wasn't angry all the time, and I wasn't sleepy all the time, and I was hooked. I thought, if I can learn one thing and improve my health, what if I learn 2 things and 3 things? And I really haven't stopped since then. That was 1976. And that is what led me to wanting to become a chiropractic physician. Graduated in 1989. During that time, I worked in the office of this guy here, Dr. Victor Frank, and later on became an instructor for Total Body Modification. And then shortly before his passing, he asked me to carry it on. And so here I am. That was back in 2009. So I think TBM is alive and well. And it's certainly been a great journey and a great project for me. And I get a lot of gratitude. So it's very rewarding as well.
Awesome. So, you know, people saw or they can see the video with Kira working on me. And I wanted to show people that because it's so hard to describe like how this process works. And unless you watch it, like I've brought people to my sessions and they're blown away. Like they're just blown away how the body responds to questions. You know, obviously you and I both know Randy and a lot of the work he does, and it's like it's I don't know how to describe that. Do you have a way to describe TBM in words?
Well, every time I get asked to describe what TBM is, I kind of get on the edge of my seat because I'm completely curious how I'm going to answer it on that given day, and it always changes. I knew you were going to ask this question, and first and foremost, TBM is a discipline devoted to making sure that people experience the fruits of their hard work as far as it goes, like their lifestyle. So many people will exercise, they'll improve their diet, they'll practice forgiveness, they'll do relaxation, they'll make sleep a priority, and they don't get any better. And so for me, on a practical level, TBM is to make sure that if we do something to improve our health, it actually improves our health. And the reason it doesn't is because there are things under the hood that are working against us that biomedicine really is not equipped to deal with at all. And this is where I'm going to nerd out with you a little bit, and hopefully don't put some of you asleep. But physics is one of my favorite topics. And there was this huge transformation in physics that happened in the early 20th century. And that was when it was discovered that subatomic physics, like none of the particle physics, so that would be the physics of Aristotle, Newton, Einstein, none of those actually applied when you went inside of the atom. Inside of the atom, it was literally a completely new physical universe and entirely new physical laws. And so, applied, and thankfully, Schrodinger came up with this wave function, which actually explained that entire universe in one formula, if you will. But some really interesting things were learned, and that is there is no such thing as time and space in there. You can have a particle, if you will, here, and then instantly it will be here, and it will never have been in between. And that's called quantum tunneling. And then there's things like quantum entanglement, where one particle will be spinning left or right as it pleases, and another one will be doing the same, and then all of a sudden they pair, and one will spin left and the other one will spin right, and then they'll immediately switch. And it doesn't matter how much distance, it's always immediate. And so if we stop and realize with the human body, if there's a part of the human body that functions on like the principles of Newton and Einstein, that would be the biomedical aspect, of which they have three principal tools: cutting, burning, and poisoning or drugging. Those are the only tools that biomedicine has. Everything will fall into one of those three categories. That's been the case for thousands of years, certainly going back to Hippocrates. And then we have subtle influence medicine, which actually works with the body in a subatomic way, or what we like to call as a wave. Schrodinger is the wave function, and when you go into the subatomic world, you leave behind this world of particles, and everything becomes a concentrated waveform. And so what appears as a particle is actually just a concentration of waves. And so TBM works in a completely different level, completely different universe.
It's birth somewhere.
Now, yeah. Well, I'll stay away from the subject of going back to the initial singularity, which I call the uterus of the universe. But at any rate, we work where it's on a wave level rather than a particle level. So we're not manipulating the physical body. We don't consider that to be our job. We consider that to be the wisdom or intelligence of the body's job to manipulate the physical. But what we do is we respectfully interact with the body on a wave level, which is very malleable. It's very open to interacting in ways to create resonant waveforms where there have been dissonant. Think of an orchestra that's out of tune, it's dissonant, or then it becomes harmonious when everyone is resonating together. And so that's what we want to do, is we want to bring resonance to the body under every condition. And when a body has that resonance, it has a really high level of resilience, and it responds to our deepest and most like positive yearnings of what we're doing to improve our lives and our health, relationships, and everything else.
If you haven't seen What the Bleep Do We Know, breaks things down very well. In fact, the extended version. I'm a geek too when it comes to this topic, right? It's the extended version that actually really breaks it down. I love the part where they do the experiment with the camera and they're shooting the balls through.
Yes.
And when they turn the camera off, it makes a different pattern than when they turn the camera on. Really powerful in terms of just how we influence our reality based on what we observe, which is a huge part of the healing process too. Like, I mean, in terms of what I've been trained over the past with other modalities, kind of just visualizing it being done at the same time is very powerful, the work that you're trying to achieve.
Well, for me, fundamentally, healing is interacting with the same stimulus, but from a perspective that creates a completely different outcome. We really don't get to vote on what's happening outside of us. Mm-hmm. But if we can change our lens, we change the way our body responds to something. A lot of people know TBM for us working with people that have allergies and other sensitivities. When I worked in Dr. Frank's office back in 1986, I had a life-threatening reaction to poison ivy. And so I got worked on in that office for poison ivy and had a 30-year period where I was in poison ivy all the time, whitewater kayaking, and never had any reaction whatsoever. So my body, we just modified how my body responded to poison ivy. And to me, fundamentally, that is healing, because as you're saying, our experience of what happens outside of us is actually 100% subjective. None of it is hardwired. Mm-hmm. And if we change that lens, we change everything.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about reality, right? Like, everyone's reality is so different.
There is no reality per se, right? We don't have the apparatus to interact directly with anything. All we can do is make up a useful model for what is happening and go with it. So we don't need to be real. We just need an effective model. Mm-hmm. And we can update that model. In fact, I think the game of life is finding better and better models that make life easier, more joyful, more abundant, more connected, and more filled with energy. And so I'm going back to, we understand neuroscience that, for instance, we don't see anything like what we think is these images that are in our head. Our eyes do not produce these images. Our brain produces them from all these fragments of light that we have no idea what things really look like. We have no depth perception when we're born. We construct depth perception just like we construct language. Vision is actually a language. And just like you can learn a new language, we can learn different ways of seeing things, not just physically, but seen with our minds, seeing relationships and health and such. So yeah, this is a topic that I love, and I probably get a little bit too deep for most people in it. But the main point is that we don't have to keep experiencing the same reactions that we've had in the past. It's all completely malleable, and TBM is just a very powerful tool to upgrade our experiences so our life becomes more in line with what our deepest yearnings and goals are.
It's interesting that you say that, there's no set way. And it's funny, as a coach, people will go, what is the right way? And I'm like, it's not a matter of right or wrong. The question you need to ask is it working for you? If it's not working for you, we got to discover how to change it. But if it is working for you, then it's not, doesn't matter if I agree with it. It's what works for your life, right? And yeah, I mean, there's so many situations where I see people and they just have just accepted whatever label they've been given, you know, the diagnosis or something. And it blows my mind, right? Because you know my story, and some of the viewers know my story about how my family got into natural healing, you know, and it started with a homeopathic doctor, and my hair had all fallen out. And of course, no Western doctor had an answer, let alone a solution, right? And then finally, my mom decides to go a different route and stumbled upon a homeopathic doctor who's like testing my meridians, and he's like, your thyroid's off, you know what I mean? And so I was so young that I wasn't invested in what was going on, right? So like, obviously my hair grew back. I got plenty of hair now. And so when people tell me they have these issues, my question is, why are you identifying with that? Like, so fix it, heal it, change it, like, because you can. And there was a woman recently who she was posting about how she had diabetes insipidus. I had diabetes insipidus for like a week. Like something tripped up my kidney. I was severely dehydrated. It was the weirdest thing, right? And I went to Nicole, who you know, and she's like, she's muscle testing. She's like, oh, you have diabetes insipidus. Let me fix your kidney. No problem. Next day, I'm fine. And when I told her the story, she's like, there's no way. And I'm like, yeah. She goes, what symptoms did you have? And I listed all of them. And she was like, are you kidding me? I have lived with this my entire life. And I'm thinking, you just have to ask the right questions. Like, nothing in my experience is set in stone unless you choose it to be, you know? So obviously, but I mean, I grew up in this world of natural medicine. And so I'm always like you, I'm like, you know, it's what is the right formula that we need to get where we want to go, right? Like that's kind of the question I tend to ask a lot of times. Now you were talking very energetically. If we were to try to hone that in on a more physical level, I would say TBM is, you know, like really based on the nervous system. Like with the work that your ex-wife has done on me and now Kira, it's like, they're talking to the nervous system the whole time. Would you agree? I mean,
100%. Yeah. Absolutely. Our interface, you know, when you're working on your laptop, so we're recording this on a laptop, you're using this keyboard. The laptop is not the keyboard. There is programming, and speaking of Schrodinger, quantum physics is required to run this computer. You couldn't do it with Einstein and Newtonian physics. But we can't directly interact with what's happening in all this circuitry, all the movement of electrons. Electronics is not electric devices, it's electronic devices, meaning it's the movement of electrons. We can't directly interact with that, but we have this interface of the keyboard or the touch screen and this microphone. All of these are input things that we can then interact with that world that we know nothing about, we can't see, but yet it's a very powerful tool in our life. It's a very powerful tool in our world. These deep components, these energetic, these quantum components of our body, we don't interact with directly. We need some sort of a practical interface. And absolutely that is the neurologic system. That's what it does. It bridges from the particle world to the subatomic world for the practical aspect. And so we use a neurologic system to read how the wave function of the body rather than the particle function, the wave components of who we are, of our physiology, of our essence. We use a neurologic system to access that and to read it and to know, hey, you know, we have this little glass ampule that has the resonant frequency of a banana, and I can hold it up to your breast bone and actually see a neurologic response that indicates that it's stressing you. Well, why would the banana stress you. There's really no reason why you would need to have a banana stressing you. And so how about if we go bring about resonance so bananas don't stress you anymore? And then you find you eat a banana and it's delicious and your body works great. Instead of maybe prior to that, you ate a banana and you got a rash, or you couldn't sleep well, or you got a headache. So yeah, the neurologic system is our interface. And one way to look at TBM is it's functional neurology, basically applying neurophysiology directly into a clinical setting, rather than just leaving it relegated to the textbooks.
So obviously we have the video with Kira, but what would be like a really common, for instance, that you would come across in a regular patient that you would address and then you would correct in a session?
Yeah. Well, I would say the most common malady, if you will, is non-restorative sleep. And sleep is when the healing aspects of the neurologic system dominate. It's called the parasympathetics. And if the healing aspects of the body can't dominate during sleep, then our body gets behinder and behinder every day, because we break the body down, we build up toxins, we deplete reserves, and all that has to be replenished, kind of like a ship that's been out to battle pulling into the safe harbor. It's got to be recalibrated, restocked. The soldiers need to rest, or the Navy, whatever. And our body needs that every single night. So, then okay. So if this common theme on really all sickness, all chronic illness, seems to have as a foundational issue non-restorative sleep. And if that's the case, then what is happening with non-restorative sleep? What's driving it? What's driving it is sympathetic dominance. Sympathetic dominance is basically where the gas pedal is stuck on the car, and you're trying to go to sleep, and the gas pedal is stuck. And so your sleep is going to be fractured. It's going to be shallow. It's going to be abbreviated. It might be hard to fall asleep. You might wake up early and not be able to get back to sleep, or you might seemingly sleep really well, but wake up feeling like you need a gallon of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And so none of those things would be restorative sleep. And so why is it stuck? The most common reason that it's stuck, there are really two. One is the body is depleted of water. So we call this hypohydration. Dehydration is a more critical state. And quite often that's not the state people come in. They just simply don't have enough water for the body to function effectively. And that actually will activate sympathetics. And the other thing that activates sympathetics are blood sugar fluctuations. And we have a diet today that is very much dominated by our palate rather than our history as a species. And so our blood sugar is swinging wildly all over the place, whether it's artificial, synthetic, non-caloric sweeteners, or whether it's the real thing. For instance, our ancestors, put cream with sugar when they made ice cream. It wasn't ice milk, or it wasn't ice rice, frozen rice dream or something. And it's because fat slows down the absorption of sugar. So they would lower the glycemic index. And so high glycemic index foods, or foods that have non-caloric sweeteners, will drive an insulin response in the body that will activate sympathetics. And so we find in TBM, the first lifestyle things we have to address with someone is getting them hydrated and stabilizing their blood sugar through dietary changes. So that's lifestyle. And one of the things I loved when I studied with Dr. Frank here is I'd never met a physician that emphasized lifestyle to the degree that he had. And that's really where we always start with someone. But once we have that platform, once we have a body that's not being driven crazy by what they're eating or not eating, now we have this cooperative partner. We can interact with the neurologic system, and we can start clearing out any obstacles to that sleep and getting parasympathetics to upregulate, getting the reserves replenished at night, getting the toxins eliminated from the body at night, detensing the muscles, repairing the damaged connective tissue, digesting, the day's food, and so forth. I don't know if that answers your question. Feel free to ask clarifying questions, but that's what comes to mind.
Even in my book, I talk about that. Like if you're trying to kind of unlearn a pattern, if your diet, sleep, those things are not on point, you're on an uphill battle. Like you need to get those things harmonized first and then fight the psychological battle. Otherwise you're handicapped. Yeah. So definitely I agree with that. I guess more specifically what I was saying is like in response to the nervous system, so there would be an issue that comes up, right? And obviously I've had many sessions and it's like, oh, we need to hit this point on the spine. I need you to like hold your hand right here and touch right here, right? Because it's like body point work, right?
Yes.
So I guess that was more like if we were going to give a little example of an in-session correction.
What we'd actually do.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, a couple things, since we're not set up here to have a table and go through things and so forth. On our website, Live, TBM, LAVET, as in total, V as in body, M as in modification.com. There's a little video of me demonstrating TBM. It's a little 5-7 minute video. We'll demonstrate some of these things. But so for instance, if someone comes in with their whole head hurting. So something that Dr. Frank did was map out what types of headaches are actually indicative of what issues in the body. And in TBM, we kind of have a unique map. And we're not the only discipline that's done that. But when it's the entire head, and a migraine would fall into this category, it goes to the liver for us. And all of the functions in the body, if its resilience gets exceeded, if more is asked of it than it can respond to, it runs the risk of damaging the hardware, frying the hardware. So the body will actually pull a function offline. Mm-hmm. And so when it pulls that function offline, you're now going to get a symptom because that's letting us know there's something absent that this body needs to function resonantly that we can't keep operational because it could do lasting harm. So if someone comes in, say with a whole head headache, that lets us know that some of the key functions of the liver have been pulled offline. And so generally all we have to do is we'll just, as a practitioner, we'll just touch the liver point, which is a swath right underneath the pectoralis major on the right-hand side. And then we get an intact muscle that we use to interact with the neurologic system. And we just test, and if we see a change in muscle tone, reflecting a change in neurologic tone, when we touch that point, that we don't see if we don't touch it, or if we touch another part of the body, to the spine, that lets us know, there are some dissonant patterns related to that function. And 9 times out of 10, we'll then go to the spinal column where the autonomic nervous system, which consists of the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches that we talked about earlier, where it physically resides. And so like keys on a piano, so to speak, we will create a stimulus into the spine, just a physical stimulus, sometimes with our hands, sometimes with a tool or a wooden bipronged dowel. And we'll create a pressure there that actually stimulates certain aspects in a particular sequence that the body receives as instructions to bring that function back online. And that function will stay back online so long as the initial stressor has been removed. which is why we begin with lifestyle. Because if you're doing the same thing that threw your body into orbit, it's just going to be thrown back into, out of orbit again. And so, why waste the time, money, and effort, doing that? So it's where we start that way. Does that give you a little more of a, okay. Sometimes I can be a little bit like herding a cat, because I do tend to like to veer right into the abstract. That's just kind of how I work. So thanks for your patience. Yeah,
no problem. Another point before we get into like the current event stuff, this does tie into current events, I guess, but like the whole victim narrative, right? Like everyone's a victim these days. And it's really interesting how, through work like this, I guess you would say allopathic medicine, I don't know specifically who, has caught up and been like, oh yeah, the vagus nerve stores trauma. Well, yeah, right? And so through TBM, not just physical symptoms, but you can address psychological, emotional symptoms as well and release trauma from the system, which is fabulous.
A proverb that Dr. Frank would often recite is, the body weeps the tears the eyes refuse to shed. And in my experience, 100% of physical issues have an emotional or psychological root. And if that is not addressed, it may come back, dressed a little bit differently, but the issue will come back. And so we always concomitantly deal with what's going on in the physical body, but also the emotional and psychological aspects. And thankfully in TBM, our system doesn't require prying open memories. They're simply stored. We just access the files, and we find what is the emotional dissonance, what is kind of the emotional scar that's being carried forward in life that actually is driving what produced, this particular pain or this, particular reoccurring upset in a person's life and what have you. We just essentially erase it. Dr. Frank called them emotional erases. And by and large, that's our approach. It's just, that's not a useful file anymore. Okay, delete, done.
I am sure, though, that you've dealt with clients, though, who really invested, though, in some of their stuff, right? I mean, it can be, like, that's where the client kind of has to be taking responsibility, too, to not pull something back,
Yeah.
I know you worked on someone that, and forgive me, I don't want to put words in your mouth or butcher anything, but I think it was someone who had type 1 diabetes. And you had actually successfully corrected it where they didn't need the insulin, but there was some sort of like they went back almost out of comfort or something. It was I don't know if you want to tell that story or not, but.
Yeah, we call it a buy-in. And so I actually worked with when I was practicing, a total of 5 juvenile onset diabetics, one of which had been for over 50 years. And all of them had gotten to the point where they needed no insulin, and their body was actually self-regulating quite effectively. In fact, in my experience, clinically, type 1 diabetics are actually easier to get, healthy, if you will, than type 2 diabetics. But every one of those 5 broke the work we were doing after some length of time. And one of them was a young man in his early 20s. And something I required at the beginning was a diet of 2 weeks where there was 0 carbohydrates, 0 anything that had any sort of glycemic side to it. And he was off of his insulin. He was about 1.5 weeks in to this program. And he came in and everything unraveled. And I said, oh, okay, let's take a look at this. And he said, well, I started eating sugar again. And I said, oh, that was prohibited for 2 weeks. And he said, yeah, I just found it too hard. And I'm thinking, wow, you're going to be injecting insulin for the rest of your life, or potentially do a restricted diet for 2 weeks, which will start to taper off for you, and not have to potentially inject insulin. And I do just want to interject here that TBM is not about curing disease and diagnosing disease and so forth. We support the body to function resonantly, and these things either discontinue or they don't. And so I'm just sharing my experience that 5 times these patients no longer needed to inject insulin to maintain their blood sugar within an optimal range. Another one was a woman that I worked with, and the one that had been over 5 decades. And the other 4, it was all immediate. This particular person, it took about 6 months before she was completely off of insulin. And she also was the first one that I had worked with that had been like any real degree of chronicity more than, say, 5 years. I mean, certainly 5 years is chronic, but it was a whole new level with her. And it took about 6 months. It was just a slow taper. She used less and less and less. And then I was back in her country a few years later, teaching a course. She was actually a practitioner. That's how we interacted with each other the first time. And I said, so, it's been 3-4 years since you got off of insulin. How are things going? She says, well, I think I'm going to need to go back on it now. I said, oh, well, tell me more. Why do you say that? And she said, well, I'm still not on it, but it's my blood sugar is starting to climb. And I said, oh, well, I'm kind of saddened to hear that. You want me to look at some things? And she said, well, when you started working with me, you told me I needed to eat blue beef, and that would be really important for me resolving my blood sugar issues. And I said, yes, I remember that. She said, well, I went to a seminar a few months ago, and the person presented the seminar made this really great case that we all needed to give up eating red meat. And so I stopped after that seminar. So I think I'm going to need to go back on my insulin. And I was just like, wow. and I realized that the buy-in for certain conditions can be so intense that someone won't allow healing to happen. And so now with our practitioners, we teach a whole module on addressing the buy-in surrounding chronic illnesses. And we use type 1 diabetes as an example, because that's one of the stronger buy-ins. Is, they're told when they're diagnosed that you will have this forever, you can never be off of insulin, and so forth. And they just swallow it, like a fish swallowing a hook whole, and it goes deep inside. And it's hard to get that hook out. And I had some practitioners tell me that they've succeeded with that in addressing all of the emotional components right up front before we actually go after some of the physical ones.
I know it's kind of like a screening for coaching. It's like, no, do you really want to change? There's a commitment to it.
That's a whole other side, because sometimes, this buy-in is almost kind of like subliminal, but sometimes people just they haven't suffered enough to do some of the hard work. And so, you have to screen those people out. Otherwise, you're committed, but they're not. And that doesn't work. It's like a relationship where if both people aren't committed, no matter how many things they have going for them, it's not going to work.
Well, and I'm sure, like, as a TBM practitioner, it's not a whole lot different than what I do, which is like, I'm not here to save you, and I'm not going to rescue you. And, if you don't want to get better, I don't really care. Like, if you do, then I'm here for you. But if you don't, then that's your choice. You know, I'm not here to try to save people. And that's a huge thing. I think a lot of people, even as a yoga teacher, I'd see other yoga teachers, they really want to like rescue their clients and students. And it's like, yeah, no, if they don't want to have that experience in their mind, heart, body, and soul, then you can't force it.
You want to have a really stressful life, get in the persuasion business. I learned a long time ago that trying to talk people into things is about as stressful as it comes.
Oh, sure.
I just, like you were saying, I just simply offer what I have. If it appeals to you, great. Let's go. We're off and running. If it doesn't, okay. I get practitioners come to me and, how do I get my husband to be willing to do all of this? Or how do I get my mom or my dad or my best friend? Or how do I get my patients to drink? This is, you know, one of the things in TBM, we require quite a bit of water. It's 2/3 of an ounce per pound of body weight. And so someone that's 100 pounds, that's 66 ounces. And that's more than 2 quarts. And that's a substantial amount of water. If someone is 200 pounds, then you're talking a gallon a day. You have to make an effort to drink that much. And I would have practitioners come in, how in your practice did you get people to drink the water? And I said, it's easy. I wouldn't accept them if they wouldn't. It's very simple. I would let them know right up front, this is required. If you're not going to do this, if you're not going to follow through with this, then I'll just refer you to someone else, because I don't have the tools to heal you without you doing your part. And as far as what I know, this is one of your parts. You got to drink your water and work on these other things. And so, yeah, so I learned it's trying to get people to do things they don't want to do. That's about as unfun as it comes.
I think my dad is the only person that I know where I can be like, this is good for you, do it. And be like, okay. He's probably the only person I know. He just takes it, he trusts me, does it. Doesn't argue, right? But most people, yeah, it's tough. And I remember when I was 14 and I was recovering from my eating disorder and like my low point, you know, being suicidal and stuff, my mom took me to an herbalist. And the woman gave me a book and she goes, I won't work with you until you read this book. And it was The Game of Life and How to Play It, which has been super helpful. And still to this day. It's written in the 1920s, 100 pages, kindergarten reading, but like just so effective in terms of mindset. And it really did shift my mindset to the whole idea of like the quantum world, right? And it was just essentially a book. It was about the Bible, and she just translated it like metaphysically. And but I can see why she did that. Like, I'm not going to fight your health. Like, if your mind's not where it needs to be, again, it's an uphill battle.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what's interesting is what I discovered, and I think this really surprises a lot of practitioners. My patients were craving being held accountable. They actually were excited. Here's a doctor who's going to tell me what to do and going to hold me accountable. They could just relax with that. And they loved it. I used to spend a lot of time with the research community in Salt Lake City, Utah, the University of Utah. And we used to get together every week for what was called a didactic lecture. And different physicians and researchers would present. And these are some of the brightest and best physicians and, of course, scholars in the whole Salt Lake Valley, literally coming from around the world. And I was astounded when we would talk brass tacks. There were 3 assumptions they made. That if the insurance company wouldn't cover it, a patient wouldn't pay out of pocket for it. 2, a person's body will never get any better than it is right now. It's as healthy as it's ever going to be. So you have to take where they're at now and compensate. The 3rd thing is that patients will not do anything. They will not lift a finger to help their situation. And these assumptions were embedded into all of that. And I found in my practice, people were more than happy to pay for something their insurance company didn't pay for, so long as they knew there was a benefit. the human body can heal and get healthier, like a lot, a lot healthier. I'm way healthier right now than I've ever been in my life. And third, people are willing to do hard things. I mean, our species, when you look at the history of our species, we can do hard things. We're geared for that. And we're willing to do hard things, provided, again, we know that there's going to be a positive outcome. And that's one of the nice things, is that every single TBM session is a show and tell. We don't just tell people what to do or just give them supplements. We actually read their body. We tell them what their body is telling us. They feel their body responding. That muscle was weak, now it's strong. You held this vial up and it was weak and now it's strong. And gee, yeah, when you did that last visit with the banana, I've eaten bananas since then and I'm fine. I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen now. So there's this partnership, this engagement, this interaction that is happening in healing that motivates people. And so I find that people really do want to be well. And what they need are real answers. And there's nothing more motivational than starting to do something and noticing that it's working. And that's the whole genesis behind TBM. Dr. Frank, another thing really refreshing, in addition to being willing to go after lifestyle, is that he had no dogma. It was just simply do what works. If something works, keep doing it. If it doesn't, stop. This is not about principles. This is not about economics. It's not about saving the planet. This is not about fashion. You have someone who is experiencing limitations in their life because of ill health or psychological things or what have you. And our job is to get people better. And I used to tell my patients, I say, look, I'm as concrete as probably anyone on the planet. I really hate things that aren't at first blush very, very concrete and very direct and linear. But truthfully, you're a human being. I'm here to serve you. And if tickling the tip of your nose with a purple feather, while saying supercalifragilisticexpialidocious is what it would take to get you better, I'll do it, because that's why I'm here. And so I love that element in TBM. We don't come with these sacred cows or these restrictions. We just simply want to help.
Right. And I mean, for me, over the years, that's one thing that I've tried to remain as fluid as I can with my belief systems. Like, I was a vegetarian for 13 years until I just wasn't, right? And, like your peer who I've gone to since I was a teenager, I mean, story after story after story, because I'm such an anomaly and I just go right to him. And I remember breaking out after eating chicken again. He's like, oh, well, you're HCl, deprived. Yeah, you HCl. And then, that was in my mid-20s. And then fast forward to, my early 30s. And all of a sudden I need red meat. I don't want chicken anymore. I want red meat, right? And no one's going to talk me out of this. It's my body talking. And that's one of the things I love about this type of work is it's a conversation with my body.
Yeah.
Not a conversation with my doctor who thinks they know what's right for my body. No, this is a direct conversation with my body. Yeah. And so for me, it's I don't care what anyone else says in terms of well, I think, or this might be good or whatever. I'm well, my body says, and I'm what my body says, and we'll just leave it at that. And I love that. I mean, just even muscle testing myself on a regular basis for, do I need this supplement today? What dosage do I need today? Not being sure, there are times where I'm just not sure, should I take this before bed or not? And I'll just muscle test and I'll know. And my body just lets me know, yeah, this is a good idea or it's not. And I have so many stories of how effective this work is. And of course, I just met you a few years ago, but in my early 20s, when I had surgery, I had a breast reduction actually. And it was the craziest thing because Within a 4-month period, I just put on tons of water weight. I was mortified. I thought this was psychosomatic. I thought I was like burying some deep memory. And I was like, what is going on? My butt is getting so big. I hope it's huge. Huge. And I was just like.
And this is before J-Lo and Kim Kardashian.
Yeah, before it was cool, right? And I was like, what is going on? I was literally, I'd never had such a big ass in my life. And so finally I cracked and I went and saw Randy because I was like, he's going to tell me something I don't want to hear. I just was like, but I can't take it anymore. Nothing fits. And he goes, you're totally overproducing progesterone and LH. Your body actually thinks you're pregnant. And it was from the surgery. The anesthesia had thrown off the hormone balance. I said, well, can we treat it? He goes, yeah, we can get the water to go away. He goes, your hips? Those are spread. That's permanent. I'm sorry. And thank God. Like, how narrow would I be if without that, you know? Because I'm so small already. But the LH had actually made my bones grow. And then, you know, it's funny because I remember and I was like, you know, he's good, but I don't know that he's that good. Like, I just don't believe it. I think I'm screwed. I literally took all my pants to the tailor and had them let out. 6 weeks later, none of them fit. I went from 126 pounds back down to 107 in 6 weeks because I had the water weight was gone. And I was like, all righty. Well then, all he did was touch some points on my body and send me on my way.
Yeah.
I was like, there's no way. There's just no way that this weight's gonna go away from that. Even though I was sold on him, I wasn't sold on that in the moment. I was like, I just felt so defeated. And so it shocked me when these pants that I had let out, none of them fit because the water weight, the progesterone was gone. The water weight was gone. My big J-Lo butt was gone, right? And so, I mean, I don't argue with people when they tell me things. I'm like, look, I know ways to heal the body like that. You can either, you know, train your mind to think that miracles occur or not. I'm not going to argue with you. I've had too many experiences where, you know, the next day, like symptoms that were there for weeks, months, they're gone. So.
And this is where one of the potential benefits I see from the beer panic. You talk about the jab, and everyone knows what you're referring to. I'm talking about the beer panic, and hopefully everyone knows what I'm referring to.
I don't even know what you're referring
when I say well, you know, there's a beer we get south of the border called Corona.
Yeah.
And
okay.
There seems to be a lot of you know, a lot of fear and anxiety.
I can be slow, don't worry.
Yeah, so I call it the beer panic. It's my tongue in cheek. And one of the benefits that I hope comes from this, I sense is coming from it, is the limitations of biomedicine. You're calling it allopathic medicine. The limitations of biomedicine when it comes to viruses, we're witnessing. Viruses have been around for millions of years. And our species has been through cycle after cycle of virus. We get through them. There are prices that are sometimes to be paid. Sometimes those prices are kind of minuscule, a few days lost to work. Sometimes the price is quite high and you'll lose 80% of a particular population. I mean, this type of thing happens. But I find it interesting that biomedicine, which claims this, has this air of superiority and wants to be the exclusive guardians of human health. Their recommendation is, oh, a virus, let's close the world. Let's stop life. Let's ruin lives. Let's destroy creativity. Let's prevent connection with other people. Really? This is the best you've got? And so, you know, yes, a lot of people are very close to subtle influence medicine. The type of work we do, it's for them, it's not concrete enough. It's not touted by the scientific elite or whatnot. But I think a lot more people are going to be willing to be more open-minded. I sure hope so. I can't imagine any sane person could look at the management of this situation by the scientific elite by the biomedical community. Now, within the biomedical community, I find by and large incredibly good-hearted people who really do want to help people. So I'm not speaking derogatorily about any particular individual, but the whole system in and of itself, the ineptness of it to deal with something like a virus. Now you get in a car accident, incredible, you know, and so these like acute life-threatening situations and what have you, they really shine. It's amazing. And I'm really grateful that they're there. But something like a virus, you know, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I actually like the concept of vaccine. I like, and this makes me an outlier in the subtle influence medical community. We have a history of being kind of anti-vaccine. I actually think if they were done like the original smallpox vaccine, where you take a real virus and you scrape someone's skin and you smear some pus from a cow, and there's real virus in that pus. You put it on the skin, which is how we're designed to be exposed to viruses. It gets neurologically read, that everything is there to recognize that virus and mount a response. But when you take a virus and you modify it, you break it up or you attenuate it, and then you break the skin with it, bypassing all of the normal immune barriers. It's like a Trojan horse put right into the human body. That doesn't appeal to me so much. And so, you know, like the polio vaccine, that was a live virus vaccine that was put in the mouth, and you get a real immune response to that. You know, when my kids were young, we did we did chickenpox parties. Now, doing a chickenpox party makes you a public enemy.
Yeah.
Like, what? It's, you know, where are we going really with all of this? And I got off of the biomedical bandwagon as the guardians of my health in 1976. When I read John Yudkin's book, and I learned how he was treated when he said, hey, diet is actually important. The American Medical Association wasn't until 1980, it was 85 or 86, that they ended their long-held position that diet had no influence on health. The way he was treated, and the way I wrote this paper for my science class, my science teacher gave me a D. And I said, why did you give me a D? He says, because it's a preposterous idea that sugar could actually be bad for you in any amount. And by that time, I'd already noticed improvements in my health. And I realized there's not a lot of open-mindedness in that community. And I learned that there's a huge difference between treating or masking a symptom and increasing health. Just because a symptom goes away doesn't mean the body's healthier. Just because you can't hear the alarm anymore doesn't mean the fire is out. And so, like you, very early on, you know, chiropractic, nutrition, herbology, lifestyle, you know, changes, things like that. I've not taken a pharmaceutical since 1986. And not because I haven't suffered plenty. I have at times. I just wanted to keep my, you know, my hand to the flame and force me to find non-pharmaceutical answers that are safer. And I love the results. That's why my body, you know, keeps getting healthier. So I'm hoping that more people are going to recognize, you know, subtle influence medicine. Maybe I always kind of thought they were quacks and unscientific and just trying to get people's money or something. But maybe there's something to that, because certainly the cost of taking the biomedical approach to this whole beer panic thing is really not viable, because we don't know, next year is something else going to come down the pipeline. How far does this go? And do we really want to use the tired answers that have been given us? Or are we open to something different? And our practitioners have been very comfortable in working with people that have been affected by the beer panic personally. And I don't know if any, we have thousands of practitioners around the world that we're in communication with. I don't know of a single one that's lost anybody. And very few have even had their patients they've done our work with experience any symptoms. And those that have been very mild, very, very few hospitalizations. And it begs the question, why isn't our discipline studied? Why isn't the National Institutes of Health funding studies to study things like TBM? And they say, well, you have to prove what you do. Well, if I as a company prove what I do, are you going to trust that? Yeah, I did my own research. And here's that's what the drug companies do sometimes. And
they sponsor it too.
You know, and so we're here, we're getting results, we've been in the trenches. If you want to study us, study us. People say, don't you want to prove that TBM works? No, I really don't. You know, people that want it, we're here. I do want people to know about it. I want people to know it's an option. And if it appeals to them, then great. You know, we want to do great work for them and be there for them. Provide a reproducible, consistent, efficient result. Anyway, I know I've been kind of going on and on, but I really think it's time for some paradigm shifts, to use a cliche, some paradigm shifts as it comes to health and healing. And a dose of open-mindedness, I think, is long overdue.
Well, I completely agree. And that's why, like, with this platform I created, I mean, it's just a little grassroots, podcast I'm doing. But at the same time, it's like, how can we be of service in this wonky time, right? Like, well, I can educate people. There's really no reason to be afraid. So for people who are out there, like trying to shield themselves from something so microscopic that it's going to make its way through, I have a townhouse now, and the guy on the other side, I could smell his dinner one night. And I thought, if I could smell his dinner, like, what does that tell you about quarantine? Like, that's such bullshit. I can smell his dinner, So the idea that you can somehow separate yourself from these things, first of all, who wants to live that way? But also, like, to have that state of fear be what dominates your reality, it's so unhealthy, And so anyway, it's my intention to really educate people that there are resources, there are, literal, practical, tangible ways to cope with this, and it's not just hoopla, like it's effective stuff. So
one of my earliest mentors, the late Dr. Fred Barge, from across Wisconsin, wrote a book called Life Without Fear. And the title alone, it was worth 100 times the price of the book. And to realize that when we really understand how this world works, there's no room for fear. Fear really, obviously if you're driving a car, you don't want to drive off the road. I mean, there's just common practical fears. That's not what I'm talking about. But these fears that grip our lives, that suck the joy and the connection. And he was specifically, when he was saying life without fear, he was speaking specifically of microbes. And we have this incredible instrument here that is so richly capable of dealing with microorganisms when it's tuned, when it is replete with the nutrients that it needs. The first thing I tell everyone, anytime there's an immune issue, including infections, I tell my practitioners, what's the iodine status? And it's interesting, I went shopping yesterday. And
don't let me forget, I need to get some iodine before.
Okay, yes, you did. You did message me that. But I walk into this shop, a clothing store, and of course I'm wearing a mask. I've just come to expect a lot of stores won't let you shop without it. And some people get really nervous if you're not wearing a mask. And you know, generally it's a small price to pay to be polite and so forth. I've spoken to the anxiety of some people, and even though I don't buy into that anxiety, you know, I'm still a human being, and I want to be compassionate. But I walk in and they say, well, do you mind using some of the hand stuff and sanitize your hand? I said, actually, I do mind. And I said, oh, well, would you then put on some gloves? We have some medical gloves here for you to run the shop with. And I'm like, I'm really not interested in doing that either. And I just wanted to say to them, I said, you know that alcohol doesn't kill viruses? So like, this is all just, it's for the psyche. It's this false sense of security. The only sense of security is a robust body. You know, if the body is primed and to deal with microorganisms, you know, we can live freely and joyously. If not, yeah, we're afraid of everything. And all of a sudden we villainize people who don't, you know, follow a mask or do this or get vaccinated or something. I'd like to know if the vaccine model works. It's based on the fact that you get exposed to a microorganism and you develop temporary or lifelong immunity. That's the model as I understand it. So why do you vaccinate someone who you know recovered from the illness? I don't understand that. If getting the illness doesn't develop immunity, why would a fractured, chemical-laden injection, a fractured little fragment of the DNA from the virus, why would that create immunity where actually having a full-blown illness didn't create immunity? And so, I mean, a lot of these, it gets a little confusing to me sometimes, what people are willing to just, okay, and go along with and not question. And again, I'm not anti all of these things. I just want people to be informed. I want them to have good information. That's a whole nother thing right now, is this other side realizes if accurate information is getting out, they're not looking so good.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
So now there's this huge repression of communication with people. This is the direction we want to go. It's baffling to me, and I'm really, really optimistic that we're going to make a different choice coming forward. And the type of work that we do, and others like us, I think are going to become a lot more mainstream, because there's obviously a need. And I think now there's going to be much more interest.
It's interesting because, you know, speaking about the astrology, what's happening right now. And I was talking to someone because they were really just panicked about like how bad it's getting. And I said, imagine if you had a jar filled with bugs and they're just minding their business. And then you go and spray Raid in there. And all of a sudden they're scrambling to survive, right? I go, they're scrambling to survive. That's really all that's happening. They are absolutely in panic mode to try to maintain dominance over, you know, consciousness in the narrative. I mean, that's really what's happening. And I can't force anyone to look at things differently. I can only provide the information should they choose to, right? And but yeah, things are definitely shifting, and the more acute the panic and the control, the closer you are to the breakthrough. And I always tell my clients that too when they're making a shift psychologically or emotionally, because when you're changing your chemistry, like the cell receptor gets used to a certain dialogue all day long, right? Like if you're a depressed person and you're stuck in despair, you're stuck in victimization, it gets used to that chemical response. When you go to shift that and you're like, I'm not doing this anymore, at first you're like, this is great, everything's fine. But there's a tsunami coming. Right? Because that cell receptor is going to go through withdrawal, and after a while it's going to kick up, you know, to the brain and say, hey, where's your fix, right? And so we as people, we manifest things in our reality and go, oh yeah, that's right, that part of my life does suck, that's true, oh my gosh, right? And then boom, they cascade back. And so I always tell them, I'm like, the closer you are to breakthrough, the scarier, uglier, and the more painful it's going to look. But that's the illusion. That's just the old system trying to maintain dominance. So I agree with you, but I think it might get a little more painful before our kids. Pretty, I had a friend say to me, my brother died. She goes, there's a lot of casualties with death, and with the death of the old way of living, the old way of being, we might have little casualties. There's a lot of people who just don't want to look at things differently, and that's their right. So, that's their free will, and
I'm a bit of a Pollyanna, and so we'll see. Time will tell. I'm really proud of our species, and I see a lot of beauty in this world, and I see a lot of incredibly good-hearted people who really do want the best, not just for themselves, but for their neighbors. And of course, we're finding our way, and there are institutions. The nature of institutions is once they gain power, they then think that the people that put them in power are now their minions, their serfs, their slaves, if you will. It's like, no, this institution was created to serve us, not to dominate over us. And I think we're seeing some of the domination right now. We have given a lot of power to a lot of particular corporations. I don't need to name them. I think we all know what I'm referring to. And now they're using that power to suppress free speech. And I don't know of any other species that uses speech anywhere to the degree we do as human beings. It's quintessentially human to communicate ideas and to start being the arbiter of pick and choosing who gets to share their ideas and who doesn't. I think we're smarter than that. I think we're going to get wise pretty quick. So we'll just, maybe we'll put $100 bill in an envelope and see who's right here going forward. But I like people. I like what we're doing, and I think people are good. I think deep down they are disciplined. But it does take the free exchange of ideas, and so which is why I'm glad you're doing, this little webcast, podcast, as you call it, to here today.
So before we close, just real quickly, because Kira did, like when I lost my sense of smell, I was like, oh, must have caught the thing. I must have caught the beer panic, right?
Yeah.
And so she worked on me, and it was great because within 2 hours, I went from like 10% to like 60, and then by the next day, I was like at 80%. My smell came back, and so I just want to hear yes, no. If you want to go into more detail, that's fine. But like TBM does have a very effective way of treating not just beer panic, but also the jabs, all 3 of them. And they've been effective.
Well, on our YouTube channel, Total Body Modification, we have a YouTube channel. We share a basic protocol in dealing with the coronavirus, and we don't claim to create any cure and so forth. We're all working energetically, vibrationally. And but that is all there, and we offer to anyone that's a health practitioner the tools to actually work with that situation for free on our website at tbm.com. And that's what I shared with earlier. We get great feedback. On our website, there's a free resources section where we go in depth on working with that situation, SARS type situation. for practitioners that are trained in TBM. So kind of two different levels there. As far as, and like I said, it's been smashingly positive, the results from around the world. One of the cases that we had was the second highest antibody titer for the coronavirus up to that date in Thailand, and had just an incredible reversal of their clinical picture. And we don't tell people to not do whatever else that they're doing concomitantly. Let's put this in and see what happens on top of anything else you feel drawn to do. And as far as the vaccine goes, you know, any stress, any insult to the body can tend to leave a neurologic scar, which can change physiology in a way that produces all sorts of unwanted symptoms. Certainly, we're seeing that with the vaccines. One of the people in our network, she's a nurse and works in a hospital, and she's saying they're seeing a lot of NSTEMIs, which is a type of myocardial infarction that doesn't tend to create the massive permanent damage that a STEMI produces, or a typical myocardial infarction. And she said it is like, she didn't use the term epidemic, but she said it's very clear that there's a tie between getting the virus and now having a mild heart attack, if you will. So, you know, these things have effects, and sometimes these effects aren't just for a few minutes or for a few hours. Sometimes they'll last for decades. And so our job is to provide the tools and make sure our practitioners can mitigate, neutralize, bring back resonance so those effects stop. And so to that end, we got samples of the vaccines themselves. And what we do is we don't take any of the actual substance and put it in our testing vials. We actually just take the vibrational frequency, and we take it through a device that we've been using since the 1940s. It was Victor's original device that we've modified, and it puts these different healing frequencies into the vial along with the vibrational frequency of the vaccine or a microorganism or a toxin or whatever else you will. And so our practitioners will use this and essentially to erase the effect of the original trauma. And when that happens, nearly always the symptom constellation that was coming from that effect, it's generally instantly gone. We kind of get addicted to that in TBM. We like to see instant results, and we find we can generally count on that. On occasion, there's some hard tissue that needs some time to turn over, and so we might see a lessening of results or a delayed reaction, but generally it's quite instantaneous. And that's one of the things that's so motivational for people. We like instant results as human beings. That's encouraging. So yeah, so we have these tools, you know, for people, and that we make available. The CV 2019 kit for dealing with the acute situation, that's just free, that we offer on our website. Any practitioner have to be a practitioner. The other vaccine related files we do sell and have those as well.
So would you say for people, just so they can kind of like do the math in their own mind, because the way that I think about it, especially with like the jab or whatever, it's like, you know, it's essentially just whatever had gone in that's running a program, right, in the system, it just turns it off, basically.
Yep.
So that it stops running that program on the system. Because I know that for people, it's like, well, how do you undo that? You just turn it off. Right. I mean, in this scenario, at least,
Keep in mind that the human body, there's very few cells in your body that were there a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so your body is like a river of cells. It's constantly turning over. And so if you have, the liver takes 8 months to cycle. So let's say you have a liver impairment from 3 years ago. Is it the liver? Is the liver causing the impairment? Because none of the cells that were there 3 years ago are there anymore. No, it's whatever's driving the rebuilding of the liver. Now, every cell in the body is a torus, except the neurologic system. You're born with the same number of neurologic cells as you die with. And it's the same ones. They don't turn over. They're not the torus. And so if you have something that's happening reoccurringly in the body, by and large, it's driven by the neurologic system. And the neurologic system, it's called neuroplasticity. It's very plastic, meaning it's very changeable. And we can work with that. And like you said, we can just turn it off. If there's a problem being, reoccurringly coming into the body day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, don't blame the cells. They were there, a month ago. It's not their fault. It's what's driving those cells. It's what's rebuilding those tissues. And that is where the neurologic system comes in.
Yeah, I mean, I could have this conversation all day long. So where can people find a TBM practitioner then if they're looking for help?
On our website, there's a Find a Practitioner link at livetbm.com. And you just click on Find a Practitioner, type in your zip code or postal code if you're outside of the United States, and you can choose the radius. And thankfully, more and more of our practitioners are doing telemedicine. Mm-hmm. And so you actually don't have to be geographically in the area. Now, where it becomes nice geographically is time changes. Mm-hmm. And so, if you're in Australia and you want to work with someone in North America, the time changes can be a little bit difficult to work with. But we actually offered courses specifically in conducting TBM in a telemedicine environment. And so that's how they could find someone.
Yeah, your ex-wife treated me quite a bit after my assault, and I had a really random issue come up, and she was in Thailand. I was landing in Italy, and we got on the call, and I literally was like at the train station. She's like, "It's now good?" I'm like, "Absolutely." Yeah. And she worked on me. So.
And for anyone that might feel uncomfortable with that, you just experience it once and you realize, wow, this stuff actually works over the phone incredibly well. And again, realize we're in the concentrated wave subparticle area where time and space don't exist. And that opens up a lot of doors. And I realize this is a lot to swallow, for a lot of people. These concepts that I'm sharing, these are not like pie in the sky, weird ideas. This is what physicists will talk about today. This is what medical researchers that are in the trenches doing real research will talk about today. There was a time when what we were doing in TBM was way ahead of what was happening in research. That's not the case anymore. I find when I talk with researchers, we're speaking the same language, which is one of my causes for optimism. Yeah.
Well, like I said, if you want to educate yourself on kind of the foundation, what the bleep do we know? I mean, it's such a great movie, and really they animate it in a way that you're like, okay, I get it. The extended version is a little heavy. If you're not ready for it, if you're not ready to learn that part, then you probably will fall asleep. But it's good stuff. And so it kind of gives you a good premise for just understanding reality on a more subatomic level. So
there's also the name of the author is escaping me, but there's a book that I highly recommend to everyone called The Case Against Reality. And you want to understand kind of the latest concepts in neuroscience, and understand that we do not actually interact with reality. We create models. That book is incredible. I don't know if you
I
have read
haven't.
it or
I'll have
not,
to check it out.
but it's a great culmination of this work, and I apologize for not remembering. We'll look it up, and you can put it on the link. But that's the book I would recommend as an addendum to What the Bleep.
Kevin, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now-
This has been a lot of fun.
Now we're gonna end the recording and then end the